Tak, dámy a pánové, já než předám slovo našim zahraničním hostům, já jsem úplně zapomněl na Lukáše, jenom neboj. Já bych chtěl říct, že ARI sice potřebuje své členy, aby jsme mohli dělat to, co děláme, ale v podstatě ARI je postavena na lidech, kteří věří, že se tady dá dělat věci jinak a možná i líp. A jedním z těch lidí je Lukáš Kle, kterému asi patří hlavní dík za to, že jsme, kde jsme dneska. Lukáši, chceš jenom ve 2 větách říct, proč jsme tady? Lukáš má řadu prezentací.
Já budu mít prostor ve svých prezentacích, takže jenom děkuju všem, že jste tady, že jste přišli a děkuju zahraničním řečníkům, že přijeli a podpořili tuhle událost a já budu mít dost prostoru v následujících příspěvcích, takže děkuju.
Tak v tom případě předávám slovo a požádal bych Svenda Poulsena o jeho slova. Proč FIDIC?
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to speak in English. I'm sorry, Czech is not my second language. My first language is Danish, which is not very similar to Czech, so you wouldn't understand that either. So let's meet in a common second language in English, and with good help from the translators, you will also be able to hear this in Czech. The use of the FIDIC forms in the Czech Republic and what we've heard this morning has already given a very good indication of the ambitions that are here to use FIDIC in the future. Let me just briefly state that I am an engineer. My background is power engineering, and in my daily work I live from running projects to success, to completion. So I'm not going to talk about things that can go wrong. I'm going to talk about things that will go right if you use the FIDIC forms. There's no need to put it under the carpet that FIDIC that projects are very complex, especially infrastructure projects. Infrastructure projects involves a lot of different engineering disciplines. So in that respect, there's a lot of risk that has to be handled in an appropriate way. And also, there is a lot of issues where the different disciplines really has to interact. So when we go by road or by rail, we might not think of it, but actually this is some of the most complex projects we can ever come on in our part of the world. Let me just go back here. Yeah, the FIDIC contract. FIDIC is an organization that has published a number of standard contract forms for infrastructure works. They were drafted by engineers, are still being drafted, new versions, new types of forms are being drafted by engineers. And the first ones were published back in the 1950s. They came from the French-speaking part of Europe in the beginning, in the 1950s. This was during the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War, where there was a need for standard forms of contract. Since then, the FIDIC contract has been a standard used widely around the world. We talk about the Rainbow Suite. Today we're going to focus on what's been referred to as the Red Book, the conditions of contract for construction. The other one is the Yellow Book you'll find in the middle of this slide. It's for plant and design build. Then there are a number of other books in the market. Today we're going to focus on the first two ones. There's also down at the bottom on the The left side, that's what we could refer to as the gold book. It's actually the yellow book, but with an additional set of conditions for operation. So it's for design, build, and operate. It could be suitable for PPP projects, for instance. The market did ask for a book that would be a set of conditions that would correspond with the other FIDIC books if you had smaller, very simple forms, very simple projects that would run, say, for instance, for less than a year, would not involve that much cost and so on, and that's the short form of contract, the green book on the top right. And then there's the last one, the silver book. It's an EPC, it's a turnkey form of contract, and I might as well just state just right here, this is not a FIDIC favorite. FIDIC did put it into the market due to market demands, but as engineers, we are not happy about that book, and I'll come back to that when we look at risk sharing. We see the books as clear and coherent. They have all the essential clauses. The definitions are clear, and as I understand, we will also see in the Czech translations that the definitions also there will correspond clearly with the philosophy of having clear definitions and a consistent structure. They are seen in the market as being fair. Risk allocation, I'll come back to that later, and I'm sure that my good friend here, Ellis Baker, will also address the issue of risk in his talk. And then these documents are drafted by engineers, by consulting engineers, so you could say that it's a third party that's been drafting these documents. It's not the employer, it's not the contractor side. We see ourselves as sitting in the middle of that. They can cover most needs, and they can fit to requirements easily. Then again, FIDIC has a positive image in the market. It's worldwide accepted. You will find contractors that will see FIDIC as a safe set of conditions in the way that they know them, they are familiar with them. So the industry acknowledges the FIDIC contracts. They have 20 clauses. They have the same structure throughout this different set of conditions. So if you've been working with the red book, you will find your way through the yellow book as well, because there is the same architecture there. It has 3 parties. It's a 2-party contract. It's a contract between the employer, the client, and the contractor. But it's administered by an engineer. So there are 3 parties to the contract, but the agreement itself is still between the employer and the contractor. And the defined terms are written with capital letters, so if you read a FIDIC contract, you will see every time you meet, for instance, the engineer with a capital E, that's because that's referring to the defined term of the engineer. The Red Book, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but for those who would just need to refresh the memory, this is for the kind of projects where it's designed by the employer. It's the employer that delivers the design for the contractor to build. The contractor might need to do some additional design work, but that's minor work. It can be design work, for instance, dependent on which type of equipment he's using, he's installing, so that could not be made as a generic form of design. It is administered by the engineer, and there's 2 options here, that he acts impartially, he is to act impartially when he carries out his actions, his duties. He is to make pre-arbitration decisions. He is to make decisions when he administers the contract. And you might ask, what if he don't? But that's where we have the Dispute Adjudication Board installed that will make sure that the engineer acts as he is intended to do in the contract. And the Dispute Adjudication Board, and Ellis will also come back to that later on, is a board that consists, it could be one person, but normally it would be three representatives, where the parties has agreed to who should sit on that board. So that's the way the FIDIC philosophy is in the contracts, that if the engineer is not administering, not making determinations in a fair way, it will be referred to the Dispute Adjudication Board. And this is a board that's in the contract. So as long as you stay with the Dispute Adjudication Board, you are within the framework of the contract. And the Yellow Book, has also been mentioned here this morning, is where we ask the contractor to do the design. So it's a design build. It says planned and design build because FIDIC did put this into the market when there was a lot of need in the market for a new form of contract that could work or was suitable for instance, power plants, where there always would be a large amount of design work by the contractor. So that's why it says planned and design build. We still have the engineer there, and we still have the Dispute Adjudication Board that's jointly agreed by the parties. Payments here, it's not a measured form of contract. It's could be milestone payments, for instance. And just as in the Red Book, the engineer also certifies the payments. He agrees to if the payment can be made and what's the amount, whether it's reasonable, whether it's fair, whether it's the correct amount. Then we have the Silver Book. The Silver Book is widely used in the Middle East. It's a turnkey form of contract. It has a lot of conditions, preconditions you should know of before you even think of using it. It's because the market wanted this form of contract. It was very much the financial sector that wanted security or certainty of time and cost. But when you want that certainty, you sacrifice other things. The contractor takes the majority of risk, if not all the risk. Even risk you would normally consider would lie with the employer as unforeseeable ground conditions. That's the risk the contractor takes. What's not being mentioned in this slide, and it will be perhaps too long to go into this this morning, is that, in fact, this also calls for more time for the contractor to price his works. So if you look through the different forms of contract we presented so far, the red, the yellow, and the silver, you will be facing a different procurement time program with the different contracts. Because at the Red Book, you will be presenting a set of specifications, and the Yellow Book, it's for the contractor to do some design to be able to price his works. And in the Silver Book, he has to do everything upfront to make sure he does not face an exceptional risk he cannot take or he cannot make allowances for. So I would normally say that you could ask someone to price a Red Book contract, depending on the size of it, between 2 and 3 months. Yellow Book, 6 to 8 months. Silver Book, 1 to 2 years. And that's what should be considered if you want to jump on that boat that's called the Silver Book. We could come back to more about this when we discuss the risk allocation. I will address it a bit later on. I will recommend, if working with the FIDIC contracts, that you use the contracts guide, and with the translations coming up here in the Czech Republic, it might be worthwhile also to have a look here to see if some of this should be translated for guidance when using the books. It gives a very good overview of the different of the different contracts and the differences between them as well. Just for your reference, there were mentioned something about the European Development Bank. There's a version of the Red Book that's called the harmonized version, the Multilateral Development Bank harmonized version. It's being promoted by the development banks. It's under a FIDIC license. It is the Red Book, but with some additional clauses put in there by the banks. It has extensive clauses on health and safety. It has extensive clauses, or very harsh clauses, on fraud and bribery and so on. And actually, it states very clearly that the bank will terminate any contract if they have any proof of, for instance, fraud under this form of contract. The Gold Book here could be of interest because it's actually the Yellow Book, but with the operational phase in. And it's drafted for an operational phase of some 20-25 years. So it can be suitable for metro systems, it can be suitable for rail, it can also be suitable for rail systems, for road infrastructure as well. So that could also be something that could be considered in the future as well. It has the same structure as the other books. It was issued a bit later than the other books. So one thing that is a difference there is that while you see in the first books in the Rainbow Suite, we talk about force majeure. And force majeure has different meanings throughout the world. Different parties will see force majeure in different ways. So that's why in the Gold Book it talks about an exceptional event instead, and it defines what's an exceptional event. FIDIC has issued a conditions of subcontract for construction. You could say, why do FIDIC do this? Because it's normally the FIDIC contracts are for the employers and the contractors, with the engineer for administering the contract. Yes, FIDIC did this because the market did show a need for a subcontract that would correspond with the Red Book. So this is suitable for use with the Red Book. And if you have projects going out on the Red Book, you could just tell the contractor it could be an idea for him to use this form of contract for his subcontractors. FIDIC being an organization of consulting engineers, in fact, and being run by very much all this work by volunteers, as myself, has of course also a set of standard forms for the professional services. I think this is going to be mentioned a bit later on as well. There was something about the White Book and a translation of that. But this is a slide showing you all the different standard forms of contract that are available from FIDIC. And FIDIC has issued a book on procurement procedures. It's a guidebook. It's useful when you decide which procurement strategy to have and how to manage it, which FIDIC type of contract to use, how to run pre-qualification, and so on. And as I understand it, you also have a focus here in the Czech Republic on your procurement procedures, and of course this book should be read and used with full respect of the Czech procurement law and regulations, of course. But it can give you some very good guidance. FIDIC is not only in English, it's in a lot of different languages, and I put the Czech language here in red with a question mark because I must admit I did not know the status until this morning of the translation work. It would be very welcomed by FIDIC to also to promote the Czech translation. And we've just heard this morning about the very ambitious plan to The latest one, I'm thinking with the latest one. It's here. But the new one, when you come up with that will be great. And we put that and we promote that on the FIDIC homepage even more. And I'm very sure that even your new versions will contribute to more successful projects, even more successful projects in the Czech Republic. And this is where I should have taken the Czech version of the FIDIC bookshop on the slide, but you can see here this is where they can be actually be bought. The key FIDIC issues, let me just address that. Mr. Jan Krupka did mention that in the future you will reinstate the engineer as more independent, which only can be welcomed if you look at the FIDIC philosophy. He is an agent of the employer. That cannot be discussed. He is an agent. He is paid by the employer, the engineer, but he has to act fairly when he decides on different matters that comes up when administering the contract. He should be an engineer because successful projects need someone with a technical insight. We just stated that these projects are complex. They are highly complex projects with a lot of different engineering disciplines involved, and a lot of issues will come up that needs someone with a technical insight, and that's why we see the engineer as a very important person in the contract administration. And it also states, if you look at the FIDIC contract in 3.5, that he has to make the fair determinations. It actually says that he should endeavor to reach an agreement between the parties before he makes his determination. He should also consult with the parties. So his role is very, very clearly described in the contract, and he is, as stated, impartial when he carries out certain actions. In other matters, he will still be taking care of the employer's interest, of course. That's when he certifies payments. That's when he looks at progress on the site, when he assesses the risk he sees, and so on, when monitoring what's going on the site. And as mentioned when I presented the books, we will have the Dispute Adjudication Board defined in the contract, works within the framework of the contract, that will make sure that the determinations are made fairly. Ellis Baker might come back to something about this DAB. I know he's a very, very good lawyer, an expert on this, but I couldn't agree with him if he says that things should go to courts. That's where I see this, the force, the power of the FIDIC contracts is that you can actually run a whole project without even thinking of going outside the contract and go to court. And the way to ensure this is to have a reasonable risk share. Way to handle the risk is paramount here. It's really important. You will have better, you will have more successful projects. Don't try to transfer risk to a party that cannot control it. The FIDIC philosophy is a risk can control by one party better than the other. The one that can control the risk better should take it and handle it. Failing projects are often caused by risks occurring that the party could not carry. With reference to Denmark, we saw one of the major contractors that no one thought that was so robust that nothing could happen to that company. Family-owned through generations. They got involved in international projects, had been doing that for years and years and years, but were suddenly facing risks they couldn't carry. They went bankrupt. In the Copenhagen harbor, we have now for 5 years have had 2 bridges that could not be completed simply because the contractor does not exist anymore. That's not a good situation for an employer to go to the market with a half-finished bridge and say, could someone please complete it for me? And by the way, I only have these funds. I don't have the doubled, and you can be sure in the market you will not see that it can be completed at the price you were expecting. So that's what can happen if you don't have a good, reasonable risk sharing. If you look at the books, we refer to the books, then you'll see that the red book, the condition contract for construction, the owner, the employer, retains the risk, but he is also in control of the risk. And the transfer of the risk goes all the way to the silver book, where the contractor assumes all risk. This is also where you in the market could see on the silver book contractors coming up with what seems to be a very good price for a project, but they might not be around to finish it, simply because they do not fully understand that it's the silver book. I think I stressed not enough about the silver book now. Should you have an idea to use it, please read the foreword there. There is some conditions that should be there in place before you use it. And when I talked about the time for bidding, please also consider the cost for bidding. I'm not sure that the market will carry all the costs without sending it on, shipping it on somewhere for very costly bidding procedures. If you go to the market where the contractor has to do extensive design work before he can put a price, and he can price his works, consider that work will be paid for by the contractor. If he's successful, it will be in the price. But just think of the situation where you will have 5 contractors bidding for a design-build form of work. You will have 4 unsuccessful contractors that's been doing a lot of design work. Because they will, in the consulting engineering industry, we are not that happy about that either, because normally we face, as consulting engineers, a contractor that tells us that we will do this at cost and our uplift will only be released if we are successful. That's also a business condition that's difficult to face for many, many years without being successful, for instance. So it's not only one set of one engineering work you are going to pay for with a successful contractor. You're also going to pay for the 4 other ones he were not successful with, and the prices will go up. So that should be taken into the equation when you address this. Could also see the risk sharing of the project risk in another way. And again, Ellis will come back to risk, and I'm sure we can also have a discussion about this a bit later. It shouldn't be all about risk, but let me just say I see this in this way. You can look at the employer's risk. As I said, in the Red Book, the employer's specified project, he assumes all risk. And we go down to the turnkey form of contract, he has no risk. But where does that risk go? It doesn't disappear. Employer has his control in the top. Control and risk goes hand in hand. If you transfer risk, you also you lose some control of it. So the contractor has his risk, and he is going to face a lot of risk when you go towards more extreme forms of design build or even turnkey forms of contract. But remember, he also takes control. And there are examples in the market where employers have transferred a lot of risk and afterwards wants to influence that risk, but do find themselves without the tools in the contract to do so, simply because risk transfers together with with control of the project. When you put the design obligation to the contractor, when you do not yourself sit at the table and do the detailed design, then you have to specify what's the purpose of these works, what's the performance you are asking for. So in general, it says that the contractor has to do his design work in a way that it ensures the works are fit for the purposes for which they are intended. But it's very difficult to pursue that if you don't tell what is the intention. What is the intention of the works? You have to do that. You will do that in two different ways, depending on the form of contract. We talk about employer specifications when you use the Red Book, and employers' requirements when we use the Yellow and the Gold Book also. But the Yellow Book, yes. So, under the Red Book, the employer delivers the design, and the contractor executes the design. That's his work. The employer has transferred his vision and ideas for a project to a set of drawings and specifications. For instance, by using his own in-house engineering department or hiring someone that can do it for him. And the contractor has to execute the works according to that design. Any change will be handled in different change procedures. And these drawings and specifications have to be precise. It's a measured form of contract, so they have to correspond to with the measurements you find in the contract when you do your payments. He only has to price the works and plan the works so he can execute them. No design required in general. Under the Yellow Book, I also mentioned the other books here, the Turnkey and the Design, Build, Operate. The employer's requirement, that's the engineering document. And it's crucial to the success or failure of the projects. You will normally ask consulting engineers, architects, and other advisors to help you draft these employer's requirements. Clearly, with reference to the conditions of contract, so that it's very clear to the contractor how he is required to fulfill his obligations. You have to specify the extent, the purpose, the scope, the design needs, other technical criteria for the works. But remember also to give the contractor a freedom, because that's why you go into the Yellow Book. It's because you want to have the contractor come up with some very good solutions, very price-worthy solutions he is mastering, he's good at. It's the way he can do this work. Perhaps he has access to different facilities than other contractors. He can do that work more quickly or more cost-effective than other works. So that's why you should give him the freedom to design and plan his works as much as possible. And design work will be complicated and extensive, and in many contracts you might forget to ask the contractor to tell you what he's doing, to have some milestones along the way where you will have a chance to see what's going on. You might even find yourself in a position where you will need to adjust your employee's requirements, because you could see the design is showing a different route than you perhaps thought of. So that's where you will ask for some of this. So you have to define which document he has to prepare and when the engineer's review will be performed. And avoid conflict or inconsistencies between the disciplines. Don't introduce something that one party should do that the other party do not know of. That's normally where it goes wrong. So the employer's requirements is actually, this is where the seed for success is laid. And I'm stressing this because it could be easy just to go into the FIDIC Red Book and say, or the FIDIC Yellow Book and say, well, we got a good standard form of contract. And now we got a very good set of particular conditions. But don't forget the employer's requirements. This is setting up the framework for the engineering work. And some key thoughts. I'm not sure, will these slides be available to everybody here later on? Good. So you don't have to make a lot of notes. I'll be pleased to hand them over to you. They have to be complete, the requirements, but not inhibit his freedom to innovate or his compromise his liability for design. With using the yellow book, then you transfer a design obligation, you transfer some design risk to the contractor. Don't take it back by instructing him what to do. So make sure you have a good set of sufficient detailed employer's requirements. Let him find the best solutions, doing the best design, and do not put in unrealistic expectations. Do not give him an alignment for a railway and then ask him to make it go for 350 kilometers per hour around a hilltop. Doesn't work. So, FIDIC supports a good project cooperation, and I firmly believe that it's a fine basis for the projects to become successful. You have to go into this trusting the other party. So all in all, growing a good project spirit is the easy way to success. Yeah. And you'll have this for reference where you'll find FIDIC. And thank you very much.